Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yang berusaha Encik Fraziali Ismail, penolong Gubernur Bank Negara Malaysia, Profesor-Profesor, Doktor-Doktor, rakan-rakan seperjuangan UiTM, kaki tangan Bank Negara Malaysia, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera dan selamat pagi. Baiklah, dengan berbesar hati, saya Khairil Baharun bin Rosli dari PTAR UiTM Cawangan Sarawak ingin mengucapkan selamat datang kepada tuan-tuan dan puan-puan ke webinar Cabaran Pasca Covid-19. Saya berharap daripada perkongsian ini kita dapat sedikit sebanyak menimba ilmu pengetahuan nanti, insya-Allah. Baiklah, dalam ruangan ini kita akan mendengar satu pembentangan oleh Encik Fraziali Ismail yang bertajuk Cabaran Pasca Covid-19, Berhampar Lapik, Berlicin Daun. Wow, kalau kita dengar daripada tajuk tu sendiri kita pasti rasa macam tertanya-tanya apa yang dimaksudkan dengan peribahasa tu. Tak apa, yang ni saya serahkan kepada penceramah nanti untuk terangkan. Okey, sebelum pembentangan dimulakan, izinkan saya untuk memperkenalkan sedikit latar belakang tentang penceramah kita pada hari ini. Encik Fraziali Ismail merupakan penolong Gubernur di Bank Negara Malaysia. Sebagai penolong Gubernur, Encik Fraziali bertanggungjawab dalam bidang-bidang yang berkaitan dengan pemantauan keuangan, pengawal seliaan yang berhemat, pengguna dan amalan pasaran, pengawalan perniagaan perkhidmatan keuangan serta komunikasi. Encik Fraziali memulakan kerjayanya di Bank Negara Malaysia pada tahun 1994. Sebelum pelantikan beliau sebagai penolong Gubernur, Encik Fraziali pernah berkhidmat di Jabatan Ekonomi dan Jabatan Dasar Monetary. Beliau memegang ijazah sarjana ekonomi dari London School of Economics and Political Science, United Kingdom, dan ijazah sarjana muda ekonomi dan perakaunan dari University of Bristol, United Kingdom. Kalau kita dengar mohon maaf Tuan Hayati, untuk okey, mohon maaf supaya saya ingatkan. Okey, terima kasih. Maaf ada gangguan teknikal sedikit. Okey, tanpa melengahkan masa lagi, saya ingin menjemput tetamu kita untuk menyampaikan pembentangan beliau. Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, Encik Fraziali Ismail, dipersilakan.
Terima kasih Encik Khairul Baharun. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dan selamat pagi yang saya hormati Datuk Profesor Dr. Jana Hamali, Rektor UiTM Cawangan Sarawak, Profesor Dr. Firdaus Abdullah, Timbalan Rektor, Dr. Khadijah Khalid, Puan Nur Zaihan, kekanda saya yang saya sayangi, Puan Nur Hayati Ismail, Encik Khairul Baharun, of course, yang berusaha, para profesor, siswa-siswi yang saya hormati sekalian. Pertamanya saya ingin mengucapkan ribuan terima kasih kerana sudi saya berkunjung ke UiTM Cawangan Sarawak. Dan juga saya sangat berbesar hati untuk meraihkan para siswa-siswi kita dalam usaha menambah ilmu dan juga untuk menghayati dan lebih memahami perkembangan yang sedang kita alami, khususnya pada masa sekarang ini, iaitu cabaran menghadapi transition kita dalam era pasca Covid. So perbincangan kita hari ini akan berkisar mengenai beberapa topik umum yang saya pilih. Sengaja saya memilih topik yang bersifat agak umum supaya kita boleh berbincang dengan pada level yang kita boleh saling memahami. Saya akan berbincang mengenai mandat Bank Negara, usaha kita untuk menangani pandemik Covid-19. Saya juga akan menyentuh mengenai isu youth unemployment pada masa yang sama. Satu cabaran yang besar yang sedang dihadapi oleh negara kita ialah climate change, Sebenarnya itu adalah satu cabaran yang dihadapi di seluruh dunia sebenarnya. And finally, saya akan menyentuh mengenai cara-cara ataupun beberapa tips atau nasihat mengenai pengurusan kewangan untuk kita. Terlebih dahulu, saya rasa ada baiknya kalau kita saling kenal mengenali, sesuai kenal. Jadi saya ingin menyentuh mengenai siapakah bank negara, apakah peranan bank negara. Saya rasa semua sedia maklum bahawa bank negara ialah suatu institusi yang mengeluarkan mata wang di Malaysia. You know, the ringgit notes and the coins in your pockets and in your wallets dikeluarkan oleh bank negara. Dan ramai juga sedia maklum bahawa bank negara ialah bank pusat yang merumuskan dan mengendalikan dasar moneteri di Malaysia. Apakah itu dasar moneteri? Dasar moneteri itu ialah suatu dasar yang dilaksanakan oleh bank pusat menetapkan pada dasarnya kadar faedah di Malaysia ini. Daripada penetapan kadar faedah itu, ia akan memberikan kesan kepada interest rates, kepada kadar faedah dalam pelbagai bentuk, sama ada daripada segi kadar pinjaman, kadar simpanan. Dia akan mengakibatkan perubahan kepada kadar pelaburan contohnya, dan seterusnya akan memberi kesan kepada ekonomi negara. Apakah tujuan dasar moneteri tersebut? Ianya ialah untuk memastikan the economy remains sustainable, kadar pertumbuhan kita mapan, dan juga kadar inflasi kita adalah terkawal. Pada masa yang sama, bank negara juga mengawal selia institusi kewangan yang tertakluk kepada undang-undang yang dikuatkuasakan oleh bank negara. Sebagai contohnya, bank-bank para bank yang menjalankan perniagaan di Malaysia, termasuk juga development financial institution, institusi kewangan pembangunan, seperti contohnya bank rakyat, bank pembangunan, SME bank dan sebagainya. Bank negara juga mengawal sedia institusi insurans di Malaysia. Seperti yang tertera pada slides tersebut. I think it's also good to pay attention to apa yang bukan bank negara. Okay. Pertamanya, saya perlu tekankan bahawa selalu wujud salah pandangan bahawa bank negara adalah satu agensi kerajaan. Bank negara sebenarnya bukan agensi kerajaan seperti mana lain-lain agensi kerajaan. Bank negara adalah bebas daripada kerajaan. Kami menetapkan dasar-dasar bergantung kepada apa yang kami lakukan sendiri, tidak tertakluk kepada apa yang diputuskan oleh kerajaan contohnya, seperti mana dalam dasar moneteri yang saya sebutkan sebentar tadi. Tun Ismail Ali has a famous quote that bank negara is independent within the government. Saya rasa itu adalah satu quote yang sangat baik untuk memberi suatu bentuk autonomi kepada bank negara di dalam kerajaan sendiri. Bank negara, oleh itu, kami bukanlah agensi yang membuat contohnya belanjawan negara. Itu adalah satu peranan yang dilakukan oleh Ministry of Finance, bukannya bank negara. Saya selalu mendapat komen-komen yang dah dekat bajet ni, tuan mesti busy. Tidak, saya hanya memberi pandangan. Salah satu daripada tanggungjawab utama bank negara ialah memberikan pandangan, mengutarakan usul-usul kepada kerajaan untuk mengambil maklum atau mengambil tindakan selanjutnya. Bank negara juga tidak bergantung kepada kewangan kerajaan. Malah seperti tertera di dalam slide tersebut, contohnya bank negara memegang dan menguruskan rizab luar negara Malaysia. Justru hasil daripada pegangan rizab tersebut sebarang keuntungan ataupun yang terakru daripada result luar negara tersebut kami gunakan untuk the running of negara, dan kami juga memberikan dividen, sebarang keuntungan dalam bentuk dividen kepada kerajaan Malaysia. Oleh itu, Bank Negara is independent, is financially independent from the government, and with that, that also underscores our policy independence. Izinkan saya untuk beralih kepada bahasa Inggeris for the rest of my presentation, and we are going into the core of the presentation, which is about really how we tackle the pandemic. How do we see the crisis? How do we tackle the crisis? So I think it's important to understand that this is like a crisis like no other. We have essentially a health crisis. We have a health crisis that is so big that requires a very strong and vigorous policy prescription. And uniquely, is the policy prescription itself that is causing a lot of strains and pressures on the economy, as we've seen. So it's not the case that we have so many people dying or being ill that they can't work. No, it's actually because of the containment measures that is causing the economy to suffer in a way. So that's critical from the point of view of when we compare this crisis compared to past crises. Typically, whenever there is a crisis, the government comes in, the government increases spending, for example, to ensure that people go out and spend and lift the economy. However, what's different this time is that given precisely the containment measures, even if the government wishes to give money and wishes to spend, by and large, people have to sit in their homes and cannot spend those money, at least in the initial stage. So, as a matter of big policy strategy, there were three folds. Number one is, we really need to contain the pandemic itself. Hence the MCO and the various forms of movement control, number one. Number two, policies need to be there to prevent economic scarring. Now, what do I mean by that? We want to prevent damages to the economy such that when the economy reopens, that economic scarring will be a lot less. Let me give an example. During the MCO, you have to sit home, your hair grows long, you need to cut your hair, but you can't. It's a genuine need that you need to cut your hair. Even the hairdressers are also closed, right? You can't go out, so you have to do it indoor. When you do indoor, it doesn't quite register as an economic activity per se. I mean, that's the way the GDP is compiled. So the hairdresser needs to be closed. The barbers needs to be closed. So there's no income for them. Now, that there not being an income for them is a huge challenge. So they need to be sustained such that when the economy reopens, they are in a position to reopen their business. And when they reopen their business, they can serve you because there's demand. And then, of course, there'll be inflows in terms of receivables on the part of the hairdressers and the salons. So to the extent that they cannot sustain the MCO such that they have to close their shops, that is considered economic scarring. And when that happens, there's a semi-permanent damage to the economy such that transactions can't happen as the economy reopens. So a main focus of policy is to precisely to limit that damage that's being caused by the economy being shut down for a considerable period of time. The third part, the third leg of the economic policy strategy is really to ensure that the recovery from the pandemic is fast, is swift, and such that those who need help can be helped. So remember, with life post-COVID is a different way compared to before. You have to observe a lot of safety protocols, health protocols. So a lot of businesses, even we ourselves, have to pivot to this new lifestyle, to this new normal. And for that, businesses, for example, or you and me, need some financial help to allow us to pivot to this new post-COVID era. So from the point of view of Bank Negara, what do we do? Of course, number one, like I said, if you look at the list of mandates, number one, we help the government to come up with the policies. We give advice, and whenever we give advice, it is based on the surveillance and the research that we've done here at the central bank. We have a strong team of economists, we have a strong team of analysts who looked at various indicators, who do research, who engage directly with businesses and households to understand where the economy is, where the economy is heading, what are the challenges, what can policies do. So in that sense, we quickly provide help to the government in terms of coming up with the right policies. But specifically, what we do under our mandate are to help things that could really, like I said, are consistent with the three big strategies that I spoke about earlier. We saw at the early onset of the crisis, there were three things that really, some people were laid off, or even if they're not laid off, those run small businesses and even big businesses. For you and me, kita yang makan gaji ni, to some extent, you can stay at home, spend a little bit of time on doing other things, researching or learning new skills. But by and large, we still have our income. Number two, what affects people is rentals. People have to pay their rentals. Again, this affects mostly small businesses and many of us. And that's, of course, compounded if you don't have your income. So income is due. Number three is loans repayment. One of the things about Malaysia is we have a very high level of indebtedness, meaning you, me, everyone, due to a very strong financial inclusion. Most of us have access to banking and financial services. And by that, we have deposit accounts, we have loan accounts, we have loans, be it small or large, we have some form of, we have credit cards, we have personal financing, we have, half of the nation's household indebtedness is accounted by mortgages because we buy property. And as you may know, property prices have gone up. So our debt level has also gone up. Also, we also buy, one thing about us is that our public transport is relatively underdeveloped. And because of that, we have to buy cars, we have to buy motorcycles. So a lot of us have a lot of debt. And given the MCO, households especially have difficulty repaying those debts. So what Negara has done, and together with the banking system, is to announce an automatic loan moratorium for a period of 6 months. It means that you don't have to do anything. You don't even have to SMS, respond, call, apply, or anything. Your loans will still be running, but you don't have to repay for a period of 6 months, right? So that helps a lot of people. The first two challenges in terms of rental and to some extent in terms of income and jobs, the government comes in with various packages, prihatin packages, pendana packages to help the relief period, at least at the onstart of the crisis. So that makes sure that people stay home and people don't go out and worsen the pandemic, but at the same time, people can live relatively comfortably and importantly limits the economic scarring that I mentioned earlier. So that's what Negara does. Of course, we also do a lot of things in the markets. We make sure where there's enough liquidity in the banking system. We allow regulatory relief for the banks. One thing about banks, that people don't realize is banks is a highly regulated business. It's not, for example, a restaurant. A restaurant, you put up a restaurant or a kedai runcit, you have a few rules in regards to safety, in regards to the running of the business. Whereas when it comes to banks, a lot of things are highly controlled. I have an analogy that my friend gave me that it's a bit like, for example, the airline industry. If you're a pilot, if you are taxiing your aircraft at the runway, every single move that you do, you need directions from the air control tower. So in a way, for the banks, a lot of the things that bank does are subject to strict regulations on the part of the Negara and the regulators. So the banks themselves were helping the institutions. Now, of course, the crisis not run forever. We are successful in somewhat containing the crisis. The health crisis is by and large contained. At the same time, we can start transitioning from what we have earlier in the relief stage to the recovery stage. The economy has gradually reopened. People have gone back to work. So the kind of assistance that were provided are shifting from, say, for example, a broad form of assistance to more targeted assistance. Take, for example, the loan moratorium. And so I'm sure you've heard about all the campaign about the moratorium is coming to an end by end of this month. So that means you have to start reservicing your loans to the extent that you can't be in the position to re-enter into your loan repayment program. You can sign up for the programs that are offered by banks. For those who lost their jobs, there's an automatic loan extension. All you need to do is to go to banks and prove that you are unemployed, and you will continue to get the assistance. People ask, I see many questions about, oh no, the moratorium is ending, the big measures are ending, then the economy will go into a tailspin. That's not true, because number one, as you shall see in a minute, the economy is recovering. And number two, importantly, there are a lot of assistance that are still being there to provide, to be more targeted. After all, if you don't need it, you don't need it, right? You are in pain, for example, you have a headache, you take a Panadol. Once you're okay, you don't continue taking Panadol. Overdose nanti susah. So you don't need that. You need to, you need, but to the extent that you need help, there'll be assistance for you to continue with your recovery and your rehabilitation. Now, most importantly, the economy itself is recovering. It's rebounding. As the economy reopens, confidence has returned. People are going back to somewhat careful, but they go back into the businesses reopen. People go back to jobs. International trade has been is thawing, and the exports and imports businesses are going strong again in a way. And you can see here from our indicators, there's a lot of rebound. People talk about V-shape, U-shape. I think that's not important. The most important thing is, I think, the worst is behind us. We are on script. We are on target for the recovery. So we need to put all our measures, all our thinking in terms of tackling to ensure that we have a steady recovery going forward. So if you talk about big numbers, what we saw in the second quarter is, the economy contracted at its one of the deepest levels ever in our history. Why is that the case? Because, and people start comparing, why is it that in Singapore, in Thailand, in Indonesia, the recession is shallower? The main reason is because our lockdowns are one of the strictest in the world. We look at a study by Oxford, for example, compared to many countries in the region. We have one of the toughest lockdown, and we have one of the strictest adherence to that lockdown. Because sometimes there are rules and people just don't follow them. Students are supposed to stay at your campus in the evenings and study, but some of you lompat pagar and don't actually do that. So, but in this case, in the case of Malaysia, by and large, people adhere to those rules. People wear masks. People are pretty much complying to the standard operating procedures as the economy gradually reopens. So what we are seeing is a quick rebound in terms of economic activity, and that's augurs well for the economy. Now, having said that, I think even as we recover, we need to remember that even as we entered COVID, we have some structural issues affecting the economy. I mentioned about high indebtedness. We have the high level of debt in terms of the government. We have high level of debt in terms of household. We have the government's fiscal position is a little bit challenging. They've been overspending. Roughly, for example, the government collects about 200 billion revenue, but spends about 250 billion. So roughly, the government has to berhutang, raise finance by around 50 billion. One good thing is most of this hutang, most of this debt is incurred domestically. We are not a country that goes abroad and borrow because we have a lot of domestic savings. Where is that coming from? You say, that can't be right. Domestic savings? I don't have enough to save on myself. Not true, because number one, you have forced savings in the form, for example, of EPF. And we have many institutional players, the insurance players, the provident funds, the kumpulan wang amanah pension, and we have many institutional investors that actually galvanize these savings. And from that, they need to invest, and they invest, for example, in some of the hutang kerajaan in the form of bonds. So domestically, we can sustain this level of hutang and spending. But what's really critical is we need to spend on the right things. And again, that's our advice to the government. Yeah, government spending is okay. To the extent that you need to borrow, please go ahead. This is the time when you really help the economy, but make sure that we invest it in areas that really helps. What are some of these areas? Number one, let's remember that post-COVID, as I mentioned, the world is going to be very different. There'll be a low-touch world. Industries, for example, like tourism, is going to be facing, heavy weather in the months ahead. For those who are relying, for example, on Chinese tourists, I hear businesses talking about, we used to have roaring business. The Chinese tourists were here. We're just waiting for them to come back. The bad news is they may not come back in the next, 36 months. So in the interim, what do? So you need to pivot to new things. You need to find new businesses that will help you to thrive in this post-COVID world. So along these lines, you have digitalization. We have to focus on the quality investments that needs to be in to help the economy. You need to invest in human capital development. Most of you here, you are students. You need to reskill and upskill and learn the skills relevant for you to be able to serve in the post-COVID world. We need to downstream in terms of our products. What do I mean by that? You look around you see a lot of, for example, oil palm trees. You see rubber trees. Where the money is an analogy would be something like, for example, the best chocolates would be Swiss chocolates and French chocolates. Do you see cocoa trees growing in these countries? They can't because of the economy. What they invest in is really the know-how to produce the best chocolates, and the value of those chocolates are a lot more than, say, the raw form of cocoa. So likewise, what we need to see, what we need to produce are not palm oil alone, refined palm oil. That's low value adding. You need to produce more in terms of triglycerides and other forms of food components, for example, that can really make the best of our palm oil. And for that, we will create more value. And once we create more value, we'll be offering the kind of jobs that are more higher paying compared to what we have now. So the challenge for us to go downstreaming is very, very paramount at this point in time. Now, I want to touch on two things here. One is on climate risk, and the other one is in terms of the issue that's related to what I spoke about earlier, the high level of indebtedness. So in terms of climate risk, one thing we need to note is it's something that's happening to us. It's happening now as we speak. There's this thing called the fallacy of optimism. What the fallacy of optimism says is our view, we tend to think that bad things don't happen to us. Bad things will happen to people, who are far away from us in other countries. It won't happen to me, my kid, my family, my friends. It will happen to some other people who are far and wide. So on climate, the climate is changing, but that's a problem for Africa. That's a problem for Australia or some other countries. But mind you, it's actually happening here in Malaysia. It's actually already disrupting our growth. We have a number of times in the past couple of years when climatic change, we call it weather patterns. But what really, if you look at it from a long-term perspective, from long-term weather pattern, you continue to hear things like, oh, the worst flooding, worst rainfall, and that's affecting precisely the palm oil that we produce. We had a sudden dip in terms of production that's really affecting the palm oil industry, that's affecting production, and that's harming our GDP. So that's climate change for you and me. It's affecting the things that we produce. And then again, with most climate estimates, you talk about, how long, long-term trends, where we are heading, and things like that. And we are not exempted from all these trends. We will be affected. We will be affected by greenhouse gases. We will be affected by sea erosion. We will be affected by other form of soil erosion. So it's more than just separate small weather-related events. You have a period where you don't have water. But if you think about it, some water disruption. If you think about it, that's arising from climate change because the rivers become polluted, the forests are gone. I don't mean to sound like a green eco warrior. I'm just talking about facts here, and I'm just talking about the sheer things that's affecting us as a country, that's affecting our livelihood. So it's not Allah to God for sparing Malaysia from things like we don't have volcano, we don't have typhoons, we don't have tornadoes, we don't have earthquakes, we don't have a lot of these things. But we are not spared from climate change, and we are seeing more and more of those things happening now. Lest we do something about it. Now, if we look at it, we have a lot of things that we need to do. We are a signatory to the Paris Accord, meaning we need to cut down on our CO2 emissions by 2030. We have a target. We need to have resolve in terms of addressing our problems with maintaining our forests, with maintaining our water systems, taking care of our rubbish. And that's a whole that needs to be taken, as this chart shows, by many, many parts of the government and private sector, and importantly, ourselves also. For Bank Negara, for example, you might be thinking, hang on a minute, just now I spoke about Bank Negara mandates. It's not in there to say that we have to take care of the environment. But mind you, we have to do two things. We have to do monetary policy, and we have to take care of financial stability. Now, what does that mean? It means that, for example, banks, they have their assets, for example. Now, we've done the quick research. We've identified that around 12% of the bank's assets are at the risk of being affected by climatic events. Meaning, for example, banks, you take loans to build a building. That building actually sits on an area that could suffer from soil erosion that would affect the value of that building, right? So, and the building is being funded by banks. So the banks are being affected directly by this. So about 12% of the bank's assets are exposed to this type of risks. I've put at the back in terms of the slides for our reference, in terms of the kind of risks that we will face in regards climate change. Feel free to go through them. By the way, all the slides I will make sure that I'll send it to Khairil and he can share it with all the audience later. But what I want to stress is, that there are many challenges that we have to face together. So on the part of Bank Negara, what we've done is we've issued, for example, taxonomy. What it means is a standard classification, so that when we talk about activity, we can identify, or we can make a form of reference in terms of how brown and how green is that activity. Our focus is to ensure that the banks make sure that the risk management within banks take into account these risks, which so far have been somewhat unaccounted, not just in Malaysia, in many parts of the world. We need to make sure that borrowers, lenders, boards, corporate captains start thinking about how we can pivot our activity or instill safeguards to make sure that the climate risks that we face do not harm our lives and our livelihood. Yeah. So academicians and researchers, of course, have a great role here to play. You can help in terms of research. Many lines of research are already out there in the West particularly. But what we need to do, what we need to be very wary of is not simply to copy all those standards, but instead to make sure that it's applicable to where we are. Because typically, some of this are a little bit one-sided. It's too cognizant of the challenges that are faced in those countries rather than here in Malaysia, right? So what I implore you, what I invite you as concerned citizens, as individuals, as fathers, as future citizens of this world is to start paying attention to these very real risks that we are facing. Let me pivot to another issue that is very close to our hearts and both you and me, which is the issue about employment. Now, I've mentioned just now that, number one, people lose their jobs. Number two, the big policy is to ensure that the scarring is minimized such that, businesses reopen and with that, employment returns, right? Now, I'm sharing here a chart, that shows, typically over the years, if you look at during crisis periods, and I've marked those, AFC stands for Asian Financial Crisis, and then we have the Global Financial Crisis. This is a period where unemployment typically increases. There is a surge in unemployment. But from here, you can see for youth unemployment, it is particularly vulnerable during periods of crisis. Now, we are in a period of crisis. I've mentioned that the worst is behind us, but that chart above, that line above is likely to increase a little bit more than the rest of the lines. So what I'm trying to say is, even as employment returns, youth would find it particularly challenging to find quality jobs. And that's somewhat shown in the right-hand side. What I tried to do there is to match in terms of qualifications and the type of jobs that's out there. Unskilled, skilled, low skilled, those are the kind of jobs. And then you have your qualification. Now, what we are seeing increasingly is that, especially under current circumstances, even though you are qualified to do a higher paying jobs, a higher value adding jobs, but because of the scarcity of jobs, because of the risk aversion of businesses, of employers, you have to go down and find jobs that you are a little bit overqualified. Now, so that's a challenge that's likely to face us in the immediate future. Now, let me show another trend in Malaysia in terms of pay. Yeah, I don't have it here, but we have, when we talk about GDP, you always talk about GDP in terms of supply, demand. There's another form of GDP where you measure returns to the economy, and where is it accrued to? In Malaysia, for example, typically, and it goes to the government, it goes to capitalists, the owners of the capital, and to the workers. And typically, what's really glaring about Malaysia is that the return to the workers are relatively lower if you contrast us against many other countries in the world. Now, what's particularly galling is in the form of pay when it comes to the workers. What I show here is in terms of young graduate starting salaries. People, to the professors and lecturers, you will always remember your first pay as you enter the job market, right? So we do it here by qualification. If you're a diploma holder, for example, when you enter the workforce here in 2010, the pay was ringgit Malaysia 1,458 ringgit. Now, roughly around 10 years later, 2018, when you enter workforce with a similar qualification, the pay is around 1,661. So the CAGR growth is around 1.6%. Now, how do you see 1.6%? That's relatively quite low. Meaning, starting salary has been relatively stagnant after all these years. You might ask, so why is this happening? That's happening because some of the structural issues that I talked about earlier, we are a country, perhaps we need to reconfigure the way, where the activities are. We are a little bit too heavy on lower value added. I spoke about how we continue to plant CPO trees, rather than invest in the downstreaming, where it's higher pay. It's also a function of at the risk of undermining the good work that has been done by our education system. It could be a function that we have not really moved the kind of level of skill sets and know-how of the graduates that we produce that's required for the economy. What do I mean by that? The likes of, for example, Amazon, Google, when they want to start up business, they don't come to Malaysia. They would go, for example, rather to Singapore. And if you ask them, why is that the case? They would say, that's where the talent is. I can get talents to do the requisite level of complexity that's required from the job. If I come to Malaysia, I will find difficulty, employing, because I can't find those type of graduates. So in a way, it's both a supply and demand, and it's not easy. These are some of the structural issues that I spoke about that we need to tackle. Because otherwise, this trend that you see, this trend of low-paying jobs that we produce is likely to affect us, whether it's pre-COVID or post-COVID, unless we do something about it. I'm coming to the end. So what do you do if you want to go out there and really help yourself to thrive in this new environment? Okay. Apart from raising your skills, your technical skills, your soft skills, one thing you need to pay attention to as students, as future voters, very, very soon, you need to pay attention to your financial well-being. You need to avoid from being trapped in financial vulnerability. What do I mean by that? Typically, when we enter the workforce, due to a lack of understanding of how finance works, we tend to make the wrong financial decisions. We tend to take, for example, debt that shouldn't be incurred, or the form of financial loans that is not meant for you, or it's more costly for what you need. So, and that's causing high indebtedness, one, and that's causing a lot of financial stress and difficulties, as shown here. For example, 52% in our survey has difficulty raising 1,000 ringgit immediately in the form of whenever there's emergency. Come on, when you have emergency, that's the minimum that you need, but you can't even raise that much money. People often say, but it's my pay is so low, how can I save? Again, that's another fallacy. You can save. You can always save in whatever circumstances. The issue, the core strategy is for you to save no matter how little, to save a little bit and consistently. And that would easily help you to do a nice tidy buffer to help you overcome many financial challenges. So we need to be helped. Pay attention to your financial know-how and your ability to manage your finance as you progress through life. So it's important for you to know, for example, the differences between saving account, checking account, fixed deposits. You need to know what sort of debt which is best for you, for what you need in your life. Pay attention to, for example, also the kind of investments that you need to put. Malaysians are infamous for schemes backfire and being victims to scams. If it's too good to be true, typically it's not true. Nothing comes easy in life. You need to earn, you need to earn it, you need to work for it, and you need to achieve it through know-how, through grit, through hard work. So what I have here also, I've put some resources of financial know-how at the back in terms of where you should be heading. You should be learning on some of these things. So we need to take control of our finance. We need to be vigilant not to be victims to financial scams, to build a little bit of our savings. And you need to stretch your ringgit. You need to be wise in terms of your financial decisions. I'm coming to the end. I think I want to end with two quotes. As you enter, real world, pay attention to, I think, how much can you learn, especially in the early part of your career. You need to, I put there as number 2, ceaselessly reskill and upskill. Skills are your best capital. So please don't look for jobs that's higher paying, but really, doesn't impart you with enough knowledge to prepare you or to give you an access to higher income later. Many people go for, I like this job because it's higher paying. With all due respect, for example, if you here in KL, we have tolls, we have toll roads, and there are juru toll who sits there in the toll cabins and just do that. Would you be continuing to do that throughout your entire life? So for a skill that can be highly automated, you have this onset of AI and things that can replace you in the real world. So how do you best tackle that challenge? And no one else will be able to do it better than you if you take charge of your own life. So on that note, I will take a pause, and I'll be more than happy to field questions. What I want to my last word will be the pepatah that I have in the as our topic here. Berhampar, Lapik, Berlicin, Daun. If you haven't Googled it already, what it means is that we need to, bermuafakat in mencari penyelesaian yang sebaik-baiknya dengan setelus-telusnya, dengan tidak berperang sangka ataupun mengambil sikap saling dengki-mengki. Kita perlu bersama-sama dalam menghadapi cabaran yang kita akan alami di masa terdekat, di masa seterusnya. Dan dalam menghadapi cabaran tersebut, kita perlu bermuafakat, kita perlu berganding bahu, kita perlu saling bertukar pandangan dan berlapang dada dalam mencari penyelesaian kepada masalah-masalah dan cabaran-cabaran yang akan kita alami. So saya akan berhenti setakat ini dan bersedia untuk menerima apa-apa soalan. Terima kasih.
Baiklah, terima kasih Encik Fraziali di atas perkongsian ilmu tadi. Dan saya pasti ramai peserta kita pada pagi ini rasa sedikit sebanyak dapat manfaat daripada pembintangan tersebut tadi. Dan saya suka sikit nak berkongsi sedikit untuk daripada pihak kami. Saya rasa ekonomi moden sekarang dipengaruhi sepenuhnya dengan terma zero sum game yang memberi maksud kepada ada yang menang dan ada yang kalah. So suka saya untuk quotekan di sini, Hamka ada menyebut di dalam bukunya yang bertajuk Negara Islam bahawa tujuan hidup manusia adalah untuk berjuang, namun bukan berjuang untuk membunuh saudaranya, namun melengkapkan kemanusiaan. Yang itu saya rasa berkait rapat dengan peribahasa Encik Fraziali pada pagi inilah. Okey, tanpa membuang masa, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, maka saya akan buka untuk ruangan sesi soal dan jawab. Okey, pada ruangan chat dekat situ ada beberapa soalan Encik Fraziali. So saya rasa kita ada beberapa minit lagi untuk kita cuba kita. Okey, soalan daripada Encik Muhammad Hairuddin Suib, salah seorang daripada warga UiTM Cawangan Sarawak. Saya nak bertanya, kenapa sewaktu pandemik COVID diadakan moratorium tetapi tidak pada zaman inflasi dahulu? Soalannya.
Baik, terima kasih. Pada zaman inflasi di mana-mana sejarah dunia pun, ekonomi masih terbuka. Tuan-puan masih boleh keluar untuk bekerja, mencari nafkah dan menjadi jalan untuk mendapatkan sedikit pendapatan atau pendapatan tambahan. Tetapi di masa COVID, tuan dilarang sama sekali untuk keluar rumah melainkan untuk tujuan-tujuan yang dibenarkan. So, and if you do, you risk infecting or being exposed to the virus, and that will be bad for everyone. So you need help, and like I said, the three big financial challenges will be loss of income, loss of opportunity to earn an income, in fact, and number two, you have to pay rentals, and number three, you have difficulty making loan repayments. So what the banks do really is to avoid you from going out and being worried about repaying, because number one, if your income is not there, you can't afford to pay in the first place, and number two, if you go and start going to banks, then you have cluster Maybank, cluster CIMB, cluster Bank Rakyat, and you don't want that to happen, right? You are supposed to sit at home and do good things, not just watch Netflix, but do good things. And that is supposed to help you tide over and to help us tackle the pandemic. When it comes to having inflation, the challenge, the policy challenge is different. And of course, we've come up with various policy measures to tackle inflation, but that's not the right medicine for the illness that we are facing. Thank you for the question.
Okey, terima kasih Encik Fraziali. Saya harap Encik Hairuddin jawapan soalan anda terjawablah ya. Okey, baiklah. Soalan kedua ya Encik Fraziali daripada Rosyahidah Buang, salah seorang daripada pelajar kita UiTM Cawangan Sarawak. Salam sejahtera. Adakah pakej rangsangan ekonomi prihatin rakyat akan diberikan lagi kepada para pelajar?
I think the keyword there is akan diberikan lagi. So I think you boleh bold, you boleh underline, you boleh italicize. That diberikan lagi. Diberikan lagi untuk tujuan apa? Right? So to the extent that, I spoke about all the challenges, and I always say that how the government spends their money is the most important thing now, because resources are limited, we need to spend wisely. So if I give more money to students, what is it for? Will it help us survive? Will it help us learn better? Will it help us prepare for the periods post-COVID? That would be most welcome, right? But this is a time when, every bit of the economy requires some help. So we need to think about how best to spend that money. We are moving from a relief period macam saya kata tadi lah, duduk rumah je tak boleh buat apa, tak boleh keluar, to a situation where the economy has reopened and people can go out. So you need to help those who need it most. And when it comes to helping the students, the government has done a lot. I'm not sure. I'm not an academician. I'm not in that area of the government that can devise the best help to help students pivot to the new economic reality. But in my role as an advisor to the government, I would say that if you need to help the students, make sure that you help it in the form that helps them the most in terms of surviving and thriving in the post-COVID world. Thank you, Rosyahidah Buang.
Okey, terima kasih Encik Fraziali. Saya rasa dengan ada beberapa masa lagi kan, boleh Encik Fraziali untuk beberapa soalan lagi. Okey, yang ni ada soalan menarik daripada Cik Nur Syahirah Natasha Nasir. Pelajar kita juga. Assalamualaikum Encik, saya ada soalan. Saya pelajar tahun akhir yang ingin bertanya mengenai bantuan one-off di bawah pakej rangsangan ekonomi prihatin rakyat. Adakah pelajar semester akhir dan akan tamat pengajian layak menerima bantuan ini?
I think I've provided some of that answers earlier, and I think specifically in terms of help, that's a question best answered by those who are in that field or in that decision-making situation for that area. I'm not in a position to answer that question. I'm sorry.
Okey, tak apa. So, mungkin ni kita akan pilih soalan last ya. Boleh Cik Fraziali? Okey, daripada Enclenses Clay. Selamat pagi Encik, saya ada soalan. Adakah yuran IPT akan dikurangkan memandangkan pengajaran dan pembelajaran dilaksanakan atas talian? Ni pun soalan menarik juga ni Cik Fraziali.
Kalau saya flip the question, saya tanya, kalau saya tanya kepada pekerja-pekerja yang terkesan, adakah wajar gaji tuan atau puan dikurangkan? Say for example lecturer ataupun academician ataupun librarian dekat sini, kampus tutup, tak buat apa-apa, kerja dari rumah. So adakah wajar gaji dikurangkan? So the same here, adakah wajar fees dikurangkan? Just because you're doing it online. So again, I'm not in a position to answer that question, but that's something for us to think about perhaps.
Baiklah, rasanya kita dah di penghujung. Tak apa, terima kasih sekali lagi. Maaf, Encik Frazali, kita ada soalan daripada Puan Hayati Ismail. Okey, my
Oh, saya
dear,
kena jawab.
Puan Hayati Ismail. Okay, my dear Encik Frazali, do we the kementerians really kurang duit? Because this is really affecting the management, especially manager bawah-bawah macam saya.
Okay. When we talk about kurang duit, let's be very clear. With or without COVID, the government memang dah kurang duit. That's fact. Setiap tahun, kalau kita perhatikan belanjawan-belanjawan yang dikeluarkan oleh pihak perbendaharaan, you will see roughly like I said, hasil versus belanjawan. And hasil will always be less than belanjawan. Kita memang belanja lebih daripada hasil kita. Right? If that happens, memang itu daripada segi istilah apa pun, itu memang tak cukup duit. Memang tak ada duit. So the issue now is how would you manage your expenditure versus your income to make sure that you can borrow, because that's the key operative word here. The government always have to borrow since I think 1990s, the 1990s. Setiap tahun duit tak cukup. Kita memang berbelanja lebih daripada apa yang kita ada hasil. That's reality. And the government have always struggled to bring down that level of kadar keberhutangan negara. Alright? So memang tak cukup duit. So let's look a bit in terms of hasil. Where does the government get their money? The government gets their money from income tax, from whatever form of direct and indirect taxes, from the returns of, for example, dividends daripada Bank Negara sampai Petronas sampai company-company yang owned by the government. That's how the government gets their money. And that money, like I said, roughly is about 200 billion. But most of the expenditure, number one, the expenditure is more than the hasil, and the expenditure, most of it goes into perbelanjaan mengurus. What is perbelanjaan mengurus? Perbelanjaan mengurus termasuklah gaji-gaji tuan-tuan dan puan-puan sekalian, termasuklah cost hospitalization, cost hospital, cost health, cost education. Just now we spoke about bantuan kepada pelajar, fees kepada pelajar. A lot of it is actually being borne by the government. That's expenditure, right? So what the government has done really is one is they try to raise revenue, right? When they try to raise revenue, you and me, we don't like higher taxes. Ada VAT, what is VAT in GST? GST semua rakyat marah. Oh, tak boleh, mana boleh? Kena tax, Kami lebih rela bayar cukai pendapatan daripada GST. GST tidak adil, So semua orang tak suka taxes. But that's where the government gets their income, right? And when it comes to expenditure, you, me, everyone always demand more and more and more from the government. Right? We demand fees to be lowered, we demand higher pay, we demand better books, we demand a lot of things. And at the same time, apart from, I talk about 70% is perbelanjaan mengurus, only 30% is perbelanjaan for investments. That would be we invest in things that matter. We build bridges, we build universities, we build, 5G network, and that's exactly the kind of thing that will help us thrive in the future. Now, a lot of governments are spending more on that rather than perbelanjaan mengurus. That's reality. So, what we really must do is we have to, like I said, just like the pepatah yang kita ambil tu, berhampar lapik Berlicin Daun, we have to think about two things. One is how do we raise more revenue, and how do we really, spend our money such that you and me, we can live better, thrive better in this post-COVID world. We can learn better, we can earn higher paying jobs, and in that quest, we'll also be paying more taxes and increase that revenue for the government. So that's money well spent, I would say. That's how I would answer soalan Puan Nur Hayati.
Baiklah, terima kasih Encik Frazali. Sekali lagi saya ucapkan. Maka saya rasa kita dah berakhir di penghujung webinar kita. Sekali lagi saya ingin ucapkan terima kasih sebanyak-banyak terima kasih, beribu-ribu terima kasih kepada Encik Fraziali Ismail, penolong Gubernur Bank Negara Malaysia di atas perkongsian beliau tadi. InsyaAllah ada rezeki kita collaborate lagi. Saya juga ingin mengucapkan ribuan terima kasih kepada semua peserta yang hadir webinar pada kali ini. Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, maka berakhirlah sesi webinar kita pada hari ini. Saya Khairil ingin memohon maaf di atas salah dan silap sepanjang penganjuran webinar ini dijalankan. Semoga kita semua mendapat keberkatan darinya insya-Allah. Untuk makluman semua peserta, mohon jasa baik untuk mengisi borang maklum balas yang telah disediakan. Link akan disediakan di ruangan chat. Selain daripada itu, link untuk kehadiran jam latihan warga UiTM Cawangan Sarawak juga telah disediakan pada ruangan chat. Saya sudahi dengan wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Sekian, terima kasih.